Hello, welcome or welcome back. My name's Carla and this is Karla Created, a place where I primarily sew, but I also like to thrift things and do a bit of crochet as well. But in today's video, I am going to be sharing with you what I'm about to start. Quite the big, long-winded, well, potentially long-winded project. I have decided I am going to make a quilt. Now, not just any quilt, I am going to use my scrap knit fabrics to make a quilt. And you're probably thinking that's pretty risky because quilts aren't necessarily made out of knit fabrics. They're quite hard to quilt with from what I can tell. And also, I'm not that experienced when it comes to making quilts. I've only ever made one quilt in my life. And it was about 8 years ago, and it's pretty scrappy to say the least. I mean, I love it. I love that kind of, patchworky, random, misaligned kind of style. But yeah, there's definitely things that I have learned since I made that quilt that I'm going to put into practice for this quilt, albeit it is going to be a scrap quilt. So, I spent some time yesterday going through all of my scrap fabric. Now I have quite a few tubs, which is why I've decided to make a quilt with my scrap fabric because I think I should have enough. And the reason why I've chosen to do it out of my knit fabric scraps rather than my cotton fabric scraps is because my knit scrap bucket is a bit out of control. So here we are. So what I've done, I've gone through all of my knit fabrics and I separated the 2 or 4-way stretch knit fabrics and the 1-way stretch knit fabrics. And I've picked out all of the 1-way stretch knit fabrics. And by 1-way, what I mean, and I think it's 1-way, it doesn't stretch other than 1-way. And the reason why I'm starting with these is because they're actually harder to use for anything else, clothing wise, because they only stretch the 1-way. You can kind of only sort of make patterns and clothing out of them that stretch across the body. And don't get me wrong, I have tried to use a lot of this scrap to make clothing for my daughters in particular, because obviously it requires a lot less fabric, which makes using up scraps a little bit easier. But because they're the 1-way stretch, that actually can be quite tricky. So I've decided I'm gonna make them into a quilt. So I've started by going through, I had quite a big pile, and what I've got now is 3 small piles. I have started with all of the small scraps. I have cut all of the pieces of smaller scraps into bits of scrap that are as wide as this very expensive quilting ruler that I just purchased this morning, because I am going to stitch these strips in a very random fashion to the width of this ruler, which is 4.5 inches wide. And my plan is to make blocks that are, what is this? Probably 4.5 by 4.5 square. And I'll show you how I'm going to do that, or how I'm intending on doing that. So I've started by cutting the smaller scraps into the 4.5 inch width. Any offcuts that didn't make that size, so the crumbs, let's call them, I've just started a little crumb pile because I can always turn these crumbs into other pieces that will fit the 4.5 inch width. I still have this pile here, which these are just bigger pieces that I'm going to cut down into probably 4.5 by 4.5 squares, and then whatever's left over I'll cut into 4.5 wide pieces. And there's just a lot more fabric here, so I've left those to last because it's probably not as fun as all the little scrappy pieces that I've just gone through. So this is going to take me a little while, folks. I'm going to bring you along on the journey with me because I think it's going to be fun. I'm really looking forward to it. And yeah, I'm hoping that I can turn all of this knit jersey stretch fabric scrap into something really fun and beautiful. And yeah, let's get into it. So this is how I'm thinking I will create the blocks for this scrap fabric. I have a fair bit of this calico in my stash, and I'm going to use the calico to stabilize the knit fabric, right, by stitching it to the calico in this way. So let's just imagine we're going to stitch that there like that. Okay, and let's just show you. So can you see now I have stitched it to the calico, the two pieces, and then all I'm going to do is just finger press that down, and I will do that again for the next piece. Okay, so I put my next piece down. And you can see now that it's turning out like this. And now obviously this piece of calico is wider than the 4.5 inch width that I will be cutting this down to. And yeah, we just keep going like that. And then I'll show you how I create the rest of the block. I am already having so much fun doing this. I knew that it would be fun. I watched quite a few YouTube videos recently about quilting. My favorite channel at the moment is The Last Homely House. Kate, thank you so much, if you do watch this, for inspiring me to give quilting another go. And obviously I'm putting my own kind of random spin on it by quilting with knit fabrics, but it just is so joyful playing with textiles and turning what most would consider to be waste into something beautiful and useful and just fun. My first block is done. Oh my gosh, how cute is that? So you'll see there's the calico lining, like what I'm using as a stabilizer, and then there's the front. Now the reason why I'm using the stabilizer is obvious, because it's stretch fabric. It will all warp and be out of whack and be very difficult to stitch with. So I'm going to carry on with making these blocks. I'm having so much fun already, and yeah, I'll keep you posted with how I progress. I've had such a good time. I have been piecing the scraps together in this kind of sort of matching odd even kind of way, and sort of keeping them to colour schemes, which has actually been so fun. It's been like a bit of a puzzle, and I'm gonna obviously keep going. It's the next day. Can you tell? I'm literally still in my pajamas and I've woken up and I've literally made a coffee, sat down at my sewing machine and have started making the blocks again because I am addicted. Like, it is just so much fun. I have made, yesterday and today, I've made 19 and they're just so much fun to make. So I ran out of the fabric that I was using as the stabilizer for the block pieces. So I decided to use this flannelette fabric that I had in my stash. And I found that this actually worked incredibly well because the fabric scraps actually clung to it a lot better, which actually helped when I was stitching all the pieces down. It was really fantastic. And this project is turning out to be quite the scrap busting project indeed, because I ended up using up some other random cottons for the stabilizer fabric as well. My favorite part of this whole project was making the blocks for sure. My daughter even got involved in designing some of them for me and she loved it. It was like a little puzzle, designing each of the blocks and going through all of the fabric scraps that I had. And she made a few of them and had a blast doing so. And now she can pick out her block on the finished quilt and say, I made that one. I'm starting to teach her how to sew on the sewing machine too, which is actually quite enjoyable for her and for me, because I really love seeing her get joy from sewing as much as I do. So I made a total of 40 blocks, and here you can see me laying them out on my lounge room floor because I do not have a design wall in my house, but the floor works perfectly fine. And I laid out all of my blocks to figure out the design or where I should place each of the blocks. I did take a black and white photo to make sure that I had the color balance correct, and I played with this a couple of times to get it right. I found that those red ones were quite bold, so I actually put them right in the middle on the diagonal, and played around with the other pinks and purples and a lot of the white ones that I had as well to just make sure that I had that color balance correct. I numbered and stacked each of the rows to ensure that when I stitched all of the blocks and rows together, they were kept in the right order. And I found that this method worked really, really well for me. Here it is, ready to sew. I have finished the quilt top. Here it is. I love it so much. It is so cool. Oh, just the whole process was so much fun, and it's so colorful and vibrant and soft because it's made out of the jersey knit fabric. It was really easy to stitch together. Obviously, this is not a precision quilt where every single block lines up perfectly. I was never aiming for that, obviously, because of its scrappy nature, but even still, it looks really, really cool. So the next step that I need to start working on is the backing and the binding after that. So I thought I would share with you what fabrics I have pulled out of my stash for the backing. So I have found this polka dot cotton. It has an interesting texture. I don't actually know what this texture is called. It's, I don't know if, can you see it there? I don't know if you can see it. It's like a waffle kind of texture to it, I guess. And I have just enough to do a backing piece. I don't have enough to do the binding. I will be doing the binding in this plain white fabric, which was also in my stash. And this is also like a waffle kind of texture. Both of these fabrics were gifted to me. This one was from my friend, and we did like a swap, like a stash swap not long ago. Well, actually, it was quite a while ago, a couple of years now. I did go and buy wadding for the inside because it was on sale at Spotlight, so I got 40% off. So I have enough here to make another quilt after this, because obviously this one is quite small and this is a queen size, so I'm going to be making another one with the leftover. So maximizing my money on these projects, and yeah, really excited. Okay, so step one, I'm going to wash these fabrics, wash and dry them first because they've not yet been washed, and yeah, then I'll get working on the backing. Okay, so that was quite the adventure, getting the wadding cut to size. I had to take my jumper off because I got all hot crawling around on the floor. I'm sweaty. So I also just remembered that I need to quilt the quilt. I thought, oh yeah, I'll just get the backing piece on and then binding done. But I need to quilt it to make sure that all three layers stay together. So I'm now feeling a little bit silly for forgetting that step, but also thinking to myself whether I should hand quilt it or use my machine, my domestic sewing machine. Nina's fantastic, but I'm not sure if it's going to be kind of thick, and yeah, there's quite a lot of seams, obviously. And they're thick seams too, because I've got the stabilizer pieces, which are a combination of calico, cotton, and flannelette for some reason, because I thought that was a good idea, as well as the knit fabric scrap pieces on top. So yeah, it's quite thick. So I'm not sure if my machine is going to handle it. I did hand quilt the very first quilt that I made 8 years ago. I hand quilted that because I made it like a single bed quilt size, and I do remember it taking quite some time and was quite challenging to do. Stay tuned. Okay, so you would have just seen that I have decided to quilt using my domestic sewing machine. It didn't take that long to quilt, which was really, really good. My bobbin ran out on the last stitch row, and I was like, but anyway, so I've quilted it, and now I'm just going to cut it down and start prepping the binding. But I thought that I would just jump in here and just share a few things that I forgot to mention thus far in this video. So the idea to use the scraps and use the stabilizer pieces, which form the two halves of each individual block, actually came from a YouTube video that I watched by Just Get It Done Quilts, where I think her name was Karen. She made a scrappy quilt using, gosh, what was it? It was like some kind of receipt tape, and she stitched down all of the scraps in the same way that I've done to the receipt tape, which I thought was really, really clever. And then she picked off the receipt tape afterwards. Now, obviously, I didn't use the paper tape for my version. I used a combination of calico scrap pieces cut to size to make up two halves of a single block. And I also used other scrap cotton that I'd had, and I cut them to size. So I think it worked really, really well. The only challenge with my method is the bulkiness of the seams. So I would definitely recommend, if you're going to do the same thing that I've done in this video, cut your seams down. I didn't, and they're a little bit bulky. You can kind of feel them through the quilt. I don't really mind, but if you prefer to avoid that, then really try and cut your seams down if you can. But obviously knit stretch fabric can be quite thick to work with anyway, and you will have quite a bit of seams if you are using scrap, depending on what size scraps you've got. So I thought I would share that. I am obviously not an experienced quilter. I'm definitely a beginner. So if you're watching this video and if you have any tips or suggestions for the process that I went through that you can provide, please let me know. I would love to hear what I could have done better, what other alternatives I could have followed to make this quilt work. So yeah, I'd really love to hear from you if you know a lot more about quilting than what I do, because I'm already thinking about the next quilt that I want to make. And yeah, I'd love some tips and tricks from those of you who are much more experienced quilters than what I am. So stay tuned for that video, because I'll definitely document the process. But yeah, if you've got any comments or tips, let me know. Okay, well, I'm going to get started on the binding now. And yeah, I've not made binding before, so wish me luck. It's done. It is finished. Oh my God, that was so much fun, and I literally am already planning my next quilt. I'm thinking I might make my sister a quilt for her birthday this year. She just said to me today that she would love if I were to make her a quilt. It's just now just sent me spiraling. Anyway, so stay tuned for that, because I might be starting my next one straight away. So I had to go and buy myself a thimble to hand stitch the binding on. And that process was so enjoyable. Like, I just didn't realize how much fun it would be. I thought hand stitching, oh, this is going to take forever, but it was so lovely and relaxing and just enjoyable. I don't know what's happening to me. I am now in love with quilting. Please, if you are a quilter and you are watching this, like, Is this what happens? You make your first quilt and then you just become obsessed? Please tell me in the comments if that's how it works, because I kind of feel like that's what's happening to me. Anyway, thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did enjoy it, please give it a thumbs up. Let me know what you enjoyed about following along in the comments. And yeah, if you would like more content like this, then go ahead and subscribe to my channel. It helps me out so much. And I really, really appreciate all of you staying to the very end and watching this. So thanks again. You can just tell that I'm so jazzed about this quilt. Anyway, bye.